So let's talk about how to create process flow diagrams. Kind of just an overview. I think this is general knowledge, right? I think this is really common sense stuff. So understand the components. For most of what you need to write, most of what you need to design process flows for in the real world, it's not really that complicated. For the majority of the business processes that you're going to be designing, you don't really need a lot of different things. This is what you basically need. The start and the end, which are your terminator symbols, the process step, which are the rectangles, and you could have ones that are like, this is the exact process step, or it could be a predefined process. So it encapsulates a number of other steps that you can flesh out in another design somewhere, right? So it's easier to follow. Decisions, very important, which are the diamonds, as you know. The arrows for the connector to show you where these are going. And then the input and the output. One more thing here that I think you use a lot as well is the symbol for the database, which is a circular, well, a cylinder actually, and that helps to see where things are being stored. But from a business perspective, remember, we're only mapping out business processes. We are not software architects. We're not mapping out, sequence diagrams per se, although we need to know how to read them. These are UML diagrams. We're not mapping out, entity relationship diagram. We're not building out a database. We are trying to model what the steps are in the business process. And for that reason, it's good to know the other diagrams, but for the most part in the job, you're only going to be doing a process flow diagram. So you really don't have to spend so much time trying to become expert in the other ones. If you know a process flow and you know the swim lane, like how to show which role is doing what, that's kind of all you need for the business part of it, which is what we focus on, right? All right, steps to creating a process flow diagram. So this is where people get tripped up the most because, yeah, it's one thing to just design it if you know what you're designing, but when they have a problem and they say, okay, go design a diagram, you don't even know where to start to know what to put in the diagram. So the actual act of creating a diagram and the skill of creating a diagram might be okay for you, but it's knowing what to put in it. Like, how do you know this is where you start? How do you know, what if it's a very complicated process? How do you boil it down? That's where a lot of BAs get tripped up. So the first thing you have to do is you have to identify the process. So define the scope. If you don't know where you're starting and where you're ending in the process, your process flow can go on for a very long time. You could be designing process flow after process flow after process flow because the process is too long. You have to be able to compartmentalize and say, okay, this process is only going to handle, let's say, managing the payment. So from after you've selected the product, to being able to get to a success screen, this is the flow. That's that. And then another flow for maybe after you've actually paid successfully and you actually get the delivery of the item. What are all the steps involved in that? Okay, make that another flow. So just having the sense of knowing where to start and stop so that your one flow doesn't become completely long and convoluted. I've seen some really monstrous designs in my life, some monstrous process design flows. And it's because, sometimes they're trying to show the entirety of the process and they don't realize that you could make smaller. It's almost always better to break things up into smallest chunks possible and then build those chunks together until you get a big idea, because then you can break it down further. If you want to drill down further, you have the smaller pieces already. Right? A lot of people try to make one elaborate design that encompasses everything. And then if you need to find the detail, you have to be, running around, scrolling and doing all of these things. That is much harder. So I always like starting with the small processes, design those out, and then see how those small processes boil up to a bigger process. And then I can start talking about the bigger process with the appropriate teams. And as I get into different teams, I start drilling down into the different individual processes. I find that to be the most effective way to do that. And I know how to do that because I know what the scope is. If they tell me I need to design a process for the customer support agents, that's a huge task because they could be handling all kinds of different issues. They could be so many different points and checks and things that get exported and things that have to be approved. It could be a very, very convoluted process. But I'll say, okay, this is customer support general. Okay, how do I break it down? Well, we have people that deal with claims. Let's look at the support for claims. We have people that deal with, new signups. Let's look at the system process or the process that we have in place right now for sign up. We have people who deal with just regular complaints or something like that. See how they handle those and how they wrote those calls. So I break up these into different sections, design out the flow for those, and then I can boil it together and say, okay, of all of the things that they do at the lower level, here's what the entirety of the customer support process is. And then I can use bigger process blocks, right? So that it's easier to understand, to like consume, to understand what is going on. So that's the first thing. Decide on the scope and the objective, and then you need to do your stakeholder interview. So in order for you to design good process flow maps, and normally as a BA, they want you to do the as is process flow first, you definitely have to talk to people because you're not in all the details. You don't know what's going on. So you have to talk to people. And if it's a case where the information is in documentation, that's fine. You can use a document to design your process, but you need to verify it, you need to discuss it and make sure so that the people who can approve it are aligned with what you come up with and you can get feedback from them. So stakeholder interviews, all your elicitation techniques are going to be the input. And then when you analyze that, then the output that you gave would be the process flow diagram, right? Then once you understand what the stakeholders have told you and they have good feedback, you break it, the process down into the steps, decide how you're going to, flow this out, what kind of shape you need, what best represents what you're trying to do, where the lines go, how you connect them, what's the next action after this one, if this doesn't work, where do we go? So having all your decisions, having all your activities, your inputs, your outputs, your dependencies, even your documents sometimes. Sometimes some output is going to be an Excel file. You put the little logo for Excel in there. Some documents might be a PDF, so you put that there. So as much as you can make it clear what's going on, that's what you should have as parts of your design. This video is brought to you by the Back Office Club. So go to backofficeclub.org to learn more about the program I have to help you to grow as a business analyst. So you work on real projects with real complexities from the real world. So you really can practice how to be a BA. If you have a job or you're in the job market, this will be great for you. You don't have to have experience to join. You'll be surrounded by like-minded individuals who are also trying to start their career. You have a direct access to ask a question, get the questions answered. This is not like an online course that you're just watching videos and you have a question is like, where do I go to get an answer, right? You always have the community. You have myself. You practice with the real tools that we use in the field, such as Jira, DevOps. You learn how to work with designs. You learn how to lead. You learn how to have refinement sessions. You learn how to run these stand-ups if you're in agile. So you get a lot of exposure. And we have touch points every single week. So you're meeting with me, you're talking with me, you're talking with the team, you're getting the support to grow your career. So I would encourage you to check out the Back Office Club at backofficeclub.org or the link below the description of this video. Watch this video. And then when you're done, go check out the Back Office Club because there'll be a lot of good stuff over there to help you cement yourself as an expert business analyst. All right, now go watch the rest of the video. See you over there. Bye. For your process flow. And then you need to select the right tool. So most of us, if you work with a Microsoft company that has Teams and Outlook, they probably have Visio. So you just have to use Visio. But Visio is not necessarily the best user-friendly tool. I don't find it to be that easy to use. Back in the day, I used it a lot because that was all we had. But now that we have these online tools, I use online tools much more. I use Lucidchart a lot. In fact, we're going to look into Lucidchart today. I use draw.io as well, but draw.io has some drawbacks. It's not very easy to get the lines in draw.io. The lines tend to curve, and I may not want a curved line. I want a line that goes like a right angle, So I'm not particularly happy with draw.io, but I do use it. It's a free tool. And I also use AI tools. There's a tool called mermaid.ai, but you have to type in the code. So you kind of put in some very high level code in there and it designs the diagram for you based on that. And you could also talk about it. Like you could actually explain what you're trying to do and it could design it for you. Like you could write it in layman's terms in regular text and it will design it for you. One day I'll show you guys how to do that. So there are tools out there that will make diagramming easier. Mermaid.ai, Mermaid.live is the AI tool that you can do that. And then we have Lucidchart and Draw.io. The only problem with using an AI tool is that you really have to understand what you're asking it to do, right? So it could be wrong, So unless it's a very basic process, I still don't know if a BA has the right. The effort it takes for you to articulate in writing what the diagram should be and then go correct it. You might as well do the diagram yourself, in my opinion, for some things. So you can try it anyway and see what you think about it. Mermaid.live. All right. So map out the process flow. So for me, before I even start designing, I I like my paper. I do a lot of stuff on my paper. So I might have a little scratch of what it looks like and what I want it to look like. And then I get into the tool and I make it much more refined. So there's that. If that works for you, fine. If you want to go straight into the tool, that's also okay. You need to know where to find the tool, how to use the tool, arranging the symbols, making sure you don't have little small errors like lines crossing over each other. You don't want to have that. So you have to be one of the most painful part of creating a process flow diagram is how to make sure the process steps don't overlap and it's not hard to follow. Like you have to make sure that the arrows are going in the right direction and it's easy to see where the next step is. And if you have like a loop, how you get out of the loop. Like these are things that you have to be careful of when you create a process flow diagram. And then once you're done with that, you arrange your symbols properly and you maintain consistency and readability, then you need to discuss that process with the stakeholders, discuss it with the subject matter experts. So you check for completeness and accuracy by showing it to people who should know how it should go, right? And then you get their feedback and then you revise. If you need to update something, you go update it. So that's generally the process for you creating a process flow diagram. And it's very, very common in your role. So if you're not comfortable doing this, get comfortable because it's going to be needed. And sometimes they don't tell you that you need to do it. You just should know that as a BA, this is what's needed right now. And it will make it so much clearer for them and so much more helpful for them to make decisions because they can see and follow what you're talking about, right? So here are some best practices for making process flow diagrams. Keep it simple. Like I said that before, but I'm really going to stress on this. Keep it simple because there are so many shapes that you're tempted to just pull in a shape because it might be the best fit. Like sometimes I'm doing these diagrams and I have like one shape that represents document. But I know that they typically have various documents, right? So I want to put it in the shape that has multiple layers of document to make it more accurate. But it doesn't really help because one document represents the fact that we're working on documents, right? So I don't need to do extra stuff. It's so tempting to do extra stuff because who doesn't want to make it look really pretty, right? But the more of these shapes you add, that are like, different curves and different things. After a while, if you're doing a very big process document, only you and a few other people can understand it, right? Because everybody's not in the world of business analysis. We're not people who are doing a job. Some people don't even like going to work, right? So you don't give them anything more complicated to do. People are not living their lives thinking about business analysis like me, right? And they're not living their lives thinking about, okay, let me make sure I learn how to read a process flow diagram in the case that somebody has to share one with me. They're not. So if you give it to somebody who's their day-to-day is managing a project, for example, a project manager. I'm not even going to the subject matter expert. I'm talking about the people in the project. Their day-to-day is managing a project. Their day-to-day is managing the DevOps. Their day-to-day is, discussing features with the clients or with upper leadership, and you need to explain something for them to decide if this is priority or not, or this is what we're doing and what we're going to hope to do in the future. And then you put in front of them a very complicated process flow diagram that you understand and you can explain, but when you're out of the room, they're like, what did I just look at? Like on their own, they can't follow it. It defeats the purpose because you won't always be there. Your artifact will always be there, but you won't always be there. So it has to speak clearly when you're not around. So the more simple you can make it, the more you can add annotations, the more you can add labels to your lines so they can be sure what's going on at every step, the better for you. for sure. All right, so use standardized symbols and consistent formatting. So sometimes I see people want to be creative and they're doing a process flow and they put a picture in the spot where it should be like a step. They put a picture, they put fancy logos. I don't mind putting logos where it's complementary to the diagram, but sometimes the whole thing is just a bunch of pictures. And even though it's cute, but does it help them understand what you're talking about? If it doesn't, get rid of it. People like to see standard stuff where they know what it means. If we know it's a decision, we want to see a diamond. We don't want you to create some unique thing that now we have to remember that's what you intended it to mean. We don't want to do that. Maintain logical flow and avoid unnecessary complexity. So I'm just driving home this point as much as possible. It has to be simple, very simple. Include labels, annotations, of course, and you need to review this with your stakeholders. Don't do anything and submit it as final until they've seen it, discussed it, agreed to it, or aligned with it, you know. And some of your process flows could look very different. Look at this one. This is just your software development lifecycle process flow. Requirements, analysis, design, implementation, testing, deployment, maintenance. This is a flow. So not all flows look the same. You know, you can be creative with how you make it look if it fits what you're trying to communicate. So the simplest way to make it fit. If a process flow that's a typical one that we're used to is not going to fit, well, fine, you can do something like this. But again, you're going to use your analytical skills because you're not a robot. And you're going to show the things that make sense on the type of problem you're modeling and what you want, the outcome you're trying to get from your audience that's looking at it. So here are some common mistakes that people make when they're doing process flow diagrams that you can avoid. So overcomplicating the diagram with excessive detail. It sounds like a broken record, but I'm saying it because I see it so often. Overly complicated. You lost the people in the room and then they ask you a whole bunch of questions just to confirm to you that they don't know what you just said. Too complicated, crazy, right? For example, this is a very well-known diagram and it represents an iterative process for the software development lifecycle. And back in the day, before we had the explosion of Scrum, we used to have this process, which is RUP, Rational Unified Process. It's actually an agile process because it's very iterative, but it feels very waterfall. And this was the diagram that they would use for that. It's kind of a flow, but it doesn't have a typical flow. So what it was really representing was that in the business modeling, and it's hard to read because some of it's cut off, but in the business modeling phase of the project, there's a lot more work being done in the first couple iterations on inception and elaboration, which is really just doing your analysis, right? And making sure you have all the requirements. And then requirements is heavy here. And then analysis and design, you start moving out of inception and into elaboration and construction a little bit. Implementation, you spend a lot of your effort in the construction phase, which is this phase. And then testing is a little bit more on the construction and then transition. And then when you're change management, like you're rolling it out, it's a lot of construction and transition. And then maintenance and, you know, project management and the environment, there's a lot going on over here, but it's kind of consistent throughout, right? So that was the idea behind this diagram. Was it a very useful diagram? Probably. Did you have to explain it all the time? Yes. Was it very clear? Not necessarily. Right? So even these big, you know, institutions that create these fantastical methodologies suffered from having a diagram that represented properly, having been able to design the flow. Everybody knows this, the agile one that has a circle going up. You still have to explain it a bit. It's not very clear. So I think they could work on it to make it clearer. But in your example, when you work with just a flat business process, you definitely don't want to have anything that's going to take a lot of explanation. It should be easy and obvious from just looking at it, right? So ignore decision points. Ignoring decision points or missing key process steps is another big mistake, where you may, even if you have a decision, there's a yes and a no. If it works, what do you do? If it doesn't work, what do you do? A lot of times people just are so focused on the happy path, they forget about all the options that could cause unhappy path, and that doesn't get mapped out, which is a failure, right? So you need to make sure you map out both the happy path and the unhappy path. Lack of standardization in symbols and formatting is another big mistake. Again, people want to be creative. You want to put some new symbols that you just saw because if you go into Visio and you search for, flow charts, there's so many shapes in there, so many shapes. And you might just be pulling them and say, okay, this looks cute. Let me use this. I'm going to pull this other one. And it could mean something different to different people. And it could also confuse people who have no idea what it means. So that's a big challenge. Failure to review and validate with key stakeholders. So sometimes, because as business analysts, we're going to do the stakeholder interview first, and then we're going to think we understand it, and then we're going to go design the process flow, or we may have observed what we see, how the organization runs, or what we see online, or basically maybe they share their screen with us and say, this is where I go in the morning, and then I go there, and then I go here. So they explain it to us. And even if you recorded it and they explained it one way and you thought you understood it, when you've designed the process flow, you still have to go back and confirm. You're not disturbing anybody. You're not bothering anybody. It's not a big deal. You have to confirm that what you understood and what you designed is actually accurate. Otherwise, you're going to go down the entirely wrong road. So a lot of times people get frustrated with themselves, like you're working on something so long, and you've met with people one time and you meet with them again and you're like, oh my God, I got to go meet with them again. We talked about this so many times. I don't want to ask them again. Let me just push this through. No, once you come up with something new, you have to validate it again. It's better to talk about it at length up front than to go off and build the wrong thing, because everything you do, it costs money, costs time, costs, all kinds of other ripple effect down the road. So you don't want to rush and do something that you probably could have saved time and avoided mistakes if you had spent the time to talk about it more. All right, so let's get into some practice, right?